Tonight, we're drifting down into the strangest, most disturbing corners of the Pokédex. The entries that were never meant to keep children awake, and yet somehow always did. For those of you who've been joining us night after night, thank you for being such a quiet, faithful part of this little corner of the dark. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment day 1. Now, let's settle in, and let's begin. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine the Pokédex not as a cheerful little encyclopedia clipped to a young trainer's belt, but as something older and heavier than that. Imagine it as a ledger, a record kept by people who saw things they could not explain, and who wrote them down anyway, because writing them down was the only way to make the fear sit still. We have carried these devices for nearly 30 years now, scanning creature after creature, filling in the little silhouettes one by one, and somewhere along the way we stopped reading the words underneath. We stopped noticing what they were actually telling us. Because the words are terrible. They speak, in that same flat, clinical voice used to describe a Pidgey's wingspan, of children carried into the sky and never returned. They speak of a small creature that wears the skull of its own dead mother, and cries in the night in a voice only that mother would recognize. They speak of a balloon that is not a balloon at all, but a bag of trapped and screaming souls, and of a little fox whose 9 tails will curse you for 1,000 years if you so much as tug one. And the most unsettling part, the part that keeps you lying awake in the pale glow of the save screen, is that no one in that world seems frightened by any of it. The professors record these horrors and move calmly to the next entry. The children skip past them on their way to the next town. The music keeps playing, bright and untroubled, over a world that is quietly, patiently full of death.
Tonight, we are going to slow down. We are going to stop skipping. We are going to read the entries the way they were meant to be read, one at a time, in the dark, and we are going to sit with them long enough to feel the cold underneath the color. This is not a list of fun facts. This is an autopsy of a world that pretends to be gentle, and tonight we are the ones holding the scalpel.
Let us begin where so many nightmares begin, in a quiet grave, with a small creature and a skull that does not belong to it. Deep in the rocky tunnels beneath Kanto, where the light of the surface never reaches, and the only sound is the slow drip of water through stone, there lives a Pokémon that the Pokédex describes with a single, devastating detail. Cubone, it says, wears the skull of its dead mother. Read that again, slowly, the way the researchers must have written it, and let the meaning arrive the way it always does, a beat too late. This is not a helmet. It is not armor grown from its own body, the way a Squirtle grows its shell. It is a skull, taken from a corpse, from the corpse of the one creature that loved it, and worn over its own small face for the rest of its short and grieving life.
The entries go further, and each one twists the knife a little deeper. They tell us that Cubone pines for the mother it will never see again, and that when it thinks of her, it cries. But it cries inside the skull, so the tears roll down across the bone, and the sound that comes out is muffled and strange, and echoes through the caves at night.
Trainers who have camped in those tunnels speak of it, that low, hollow weeping drifting up from the dark, a child crying into the face of its dead parent, over and over, with no one to comfort it, and no way for the crying to ever stop. The moon, one entry tells us, is when the wailing is worst. On clear nights, when the light spills down through the cave mouths, Cubone looks up, sees the shape of its mother in the pale disk above, and mourns all over again, as if the loss were brand new. And then there is the question no one in that bright world seems willing to ask aloud. Where do the skulls come from? There are always more Cubone. The caves are full of them, each one wearing the same grief, the same borrowed bone, which means that somewhere, constantly, mothers are dying, and their orphan children are finding the bodies, and prying loose the skulls, and pulling them down over their own faces. It is a cycle without an origin and without an end, a species defined entirely by bereavement, and the Pokédex records it in the same tone it uses to note that Rattata breeds quickly, That is the horror of it. Not the skull itself, but the calm. There is a darker thread still, one the older records only hint at, and it winds its way back to a tower in lavender, a place we will return to before the night is over. For now it is enough to know that when a Cubone grows, when it finally sheds the skull and rises into its evolved form, it does not soften, it hardens. The grief becomes rage, and the rage becomes a creature that swings a length of bone like a club and no longer weeps at all. The mourning does not heal, it simply calcifies, and perhaps that is the most human thing in the entire Pokédex, that a child's sorrow, left alone in the dark long enough, does not disappear. It only learns to hit back. Let that image settle over you, the small figure in the cave, moonlight on old bone, the muffled crying with nowhere to go, and as it fades, let your mind drift upward, out of the tunnels, and into the open air, where something is floating toward a group of children with a cheerful purple face and the patience of a predator. They call it Drifloon, and to a child, it must look like the best thing in the world. A balloon, round and soft and violet, bobbing gently at the edge of town, with its little cross-shaped face and its two dangling wisps that look almost like arms held open for a hug. It drifts near playgrounds. It lingers by the docks. It waits at the places where small children gather, and it does the one thing no ordinary balloon can do. It waits back, because Drifloon is not looking for a hand to hold its string.
Drifloon is looking for a hand to hold, so that it can carry that hand, and the child attached to it, up and away.
The entries do not soften this. They tell us plainly that Drifloon tugs on the hands of children to lead them away, and that it is mistaken for a balloon and grabbed, and that when this happens, the child is taken. Taken where? The records vary, and the variation is somehow worse than a single answer would be. Some say simply that it carries them off. Others, the ones written later, when perhaps someone had learned too much, tell us that Drifloon's body is filled with souls, packed in tight, and that when too many are gathered inside, the pressure builds until the balloon can hold no more. And then it bursts, and when it bursts, they say, you can hear the screaming, not the pop of rubber. Screaming, a chorus of the voices sealed inside, released all at once into the night before they fade. Picture the scene, the way the entries seem to want you to. A child at the edge of a foggy dock, dragging its feet home in the last blue light of evening. And there, caught against a piling, a balloon, just a balloon. The child reaches for the string, the way any child would, and the string reaches back. The little wisps curl around the small wrist, gentle at first, almost affectionate, and then not gentle at all. The child's shoes leave the ground. There is no cry, because there is no time, only the soft patter of small feet against empty air, growing fainter, and then the fog closes over the place where the child used to be, and the town goes on humming to itself, as if nothing has happened at all. In the morning, there will be one more empty chair at one more table, and no one will ever find the shoes. And what of the souls inside? If Drifloon carries children away, and if Drifloon is filled with souls, then the arithmetic of the thing arrives on its own, uninvited, in the dark behind your eyes. The balloon does not simply lose its passengers somewhere over the horizon. It keeps them. It gathers them the way a collector gathers coins, one small life at a time, holding them pressed together inside its cheerful violet skin until the day it can hold no more. And then the bursting, and the screaming, and after that, somehow, another Drifloon drifting up from below, empty again, patient again, floating back toward the playground with its little arms held open. There is always another one. There is always another child. The cycle does not care that you have noticed it. The people of that world know. That is the detail that turns the stomach. In the misty canal towns where these things gather thickest, the locals speak of it in low voices by lamplight, warning their children away from the water's edge, away from anything that floats and waits. They know which day of the week the sightings spike. They know to keep the little ones inside when the fog rolls in off the water. And yet they do nothing, because there is nothing to be done. You cannot arrest a balloon. You cannot mourn a creature that looks like a party favor, so they simply live alongside it, the way you might live alongside a river that takes a swimmer every few summers, telling themselves it is nature, telling themselves it is rare, telling themselves anything at all so that they can sleep. And perhaps, in that world, they do sleep. Perhaps they have learned to. We have not learned to, not yet. So let the balloon drift on out over the black water and vanish into the mist, and let us follow the fear inland, toward a forest where the trees themselves have learned to hold a grudge, and where a small green Pokémon draws pictures on the bark that no one should ever be able to read. In the deep woods, where the canopy grows so thick that noon looks like dusk, there lives a Pokémon named Phantump, and its origin is not a matter of eggs or evolution. The Pokédex tells us something far stranger and far sadder. These stumps, it says, are said to be inhabited by the spirits of children who became lost in the forest and died. Read it slowly. A Phantump is not a creature that was born, it is a creature that was left behind. Somewhere in the tangled dark, long ago, a child wandered off the path, called out, heard no answer, and kept walking the wrong way until walking was no longer possible. And when the small body finally stopped, its spirit did not leave. It sank down into the nearest tree stump, into the cold, wet wood, and it stayed. That is why the entries continue. Phantump imitates the voice of a child, not to play, to lure. Deep in the woods, when the light is failing, and a hiker realizes with a slow, cold horror that the trail has disappeared behind them, they will sometimes hear it. A child's voice, calling out, somewhere off in the trees. Help, over here. The voice of someone small and frightened and alone. Exactly the kind of voice you cannot ignore. Exactly the kind of voice that will make a grown adult leave the safety of the path and plunge into the undergrowth toward the sound. And the sound keeps moving. It draws them deeper and deeper, past the point where they could ever find their way out again, until the forest has one more lost soul, and one more stump, one day, will learn to speak. Think about what that means for the ones already trapped inside the wood. They were children who died afraid, alone, calling for help that never came, and now, in death, they have become the very thing that killed them. They lure others into the same slow ending they suffered, using the same desperate voice they must have used in their own final hours. The forest does not simply take the lost. It recruits them. It turns victims into hunters, grief into bait, and every new voice crying out in the dark is proof that the trap worked at least one more time. When Phantump gathers together, the old woodsmen say, it is a sign that the forest is thick with the dead, and they give such places a wide berth, and they do not go looking for the source of the crying, no matter how young the voice sounds, no matter how much it sounds like someone who needs you. And when a Phantump finally grows, when it rises into its taller, older form, it does not leave the forest. It becomes its keeper. That larger shape, the one that carries a lantern of ghostly fire, is said to gather the spirits of the dead and guide them somewhere beyond the trees, a shepherd of the lost, walking the paths at night with its little green flame. Some tell it kindly, a gentle usher of souls, but the darker reading lingers, the one that fits the rest of what we know, that the lantern is not a guide but a lure of its own, that the fire draws the wandering dead the way the child's voice draws the living, and that nothing which enters that forest, breathing or otherwise, is ever truly permitted to leave. The woods keep everything. That is the entry no one wrote down, but every other entry is quietly pointing at it. Let the green flame recede between the trunks, and let the forest fall silent behind us, and let us walk out at last into open country under a wide night sky, because the next horror does not hide in a cave or a wood. It hangs in the air above the towns, and it is looking down, and its Pokédex entry may be the single most quietly monstrous line ever written in that cheerful, terrible little book. High above the rooftops, riding the night winds where nothing else flies, there drifts a Pokémon called Yamask, and to look at it is to look at a small, sad, hunched thing, gray as ash, clutching something to its chest with the care of a mourner at a graveside. What it clutches is a mask. And the mask, the Pokédex tells us, is a face. Its own face. Because Yamask, the entries explain, was once a human being. It arose, they say, from the spirit of a person, buried in the old tombs of a desert long ago, and it carries with it the mask that resembles the face it wore when it was alive. It has not forgotten. That is the wound at the center of the thing. It remembers being a person, and it holds the memory in its two small hands, in the shape of a face, and it will not let go. And then comes the line, the one that arrives in the same flat clinical voice as everything else, and lands like a stone dropped into still water. Sometimes, the Pokédex says, Yamask looks at the mask, at the face it used to have, and it weeps. It remembers its life as a human. It remembers perhaps a home, a name, people who loved it, a morning that felt like any other morning before it became its last. And it holds up the little painted face, and it looks into the eyes that were once its own eyes, and something in whatever remains of it understands what has been lost, and it cries. Not the crying of an animal, the crying of a person who has died and been left to know it forever.
There is a version of this story that goes further still, whispered in the ruins where these creatures gather, and it is the kind of thing that changes the temperature of a room. It is said that if a living person, a human being with a beating heart, should ever put on the mask that a Yamask carries, they will be transformed.
That the face will take hold, that whoever wears it will become like the creature itself, gray and hollow and adrift, another lost thing clutching another face in the dark. Whether it is true no one can say, because the ones who might have tested it are, by definition, no longer able to tell us, but the warning exists, passed down in the desert towns, and warnings do not usually survive for centuries unless something, once, gave them a reason to. Consider what it means for a species to be built entirely from human dead. Every Yamask riding the night wind was once a person who lived and hoped and feared and finally died, in tombs so old that the names carved above them have worn away to nothing. Their descendants, if they had any, forgot them generations ago. The world moved on, and they did not. They stayed, small and gray, holding the only proof that remains that they were ever anything more than a legend, one painted mask apiece, weeping over faces that no living person would recognize. And here again is the thing that runs through every entry we have read tonight. No one in that world is disturbed by it. Children catch Yamask and carry them in little spheres and send them into battle, these grieving human ghosts, and think nothing of it at all. A whole civilization walks calmly among its own weeping dead and has decided, collectively, not to look too closely at what those dead are holding. Let the little gray figure drift away over the rooftops, still clutching its face, and let us bring our eyes down from the sky and turn them toward fire, because the next creature does not weep, and it does not mourn, and it does not lure. It waits, and what it waits for is you. There is a legend, older than most, about a Pokémon called Litwick, a small thing shaped like a candle, with a single soft flame flickering atop its waxy head. It approaches gently. It appears in dark places, in old mansions and unlit halls, at the top of stairs where the lamps have gone out, and it offers the one thing a frightened person in the dark wants most: light. It bobs ahead of you, casting a warm glow across the floorboards, showing you the way, and the Pokédex tells us that people once believed Litwick was a helpful little guide, leading travelers safely through the darkness, because the flame is not fueled by wax, it is fueled by life. Litwick's small light shines by absorbing the life force, the very spirit of the living beings around it. It does not lead you to safety, it leads you deeper into the dark, patiently, one warm and reassuring step at a time, and as you follow, it drinks. It draws the vitality out of you, so slowly you never notice the moment it begins, so that by the time you understand that your legs are heavy and your thoughts are dimming, it is already far too late. The light you trusted has been feeding on you the entire time, and when it has taken everything, it moves on, brighter now, warmer now, back toward the door, waiting for the next lost soul who wants nothing more than to see where they are going. Its evolutions only deepen the dread. The taller, statelier forms line the halls of a mansion where their flames burn cold and blue, and it is said that the spirits it has consumed still burn within it. Every flame in that ghostly candelabra is a life it took, each blue fire a person who once trusted a little light in the dark and followed it exactly one step too far. Let the cold blue flames gutter down the long dark hall, and let your mind drift somewhere colder, somewhere white and silent and endless, high in the mountains where the snow never stops falling, because there is a creature there whose entry reads less like a warning and more like a missing person's report. They call it Cubone, and at first it seems almost too pitiable to fear. A small, round bear cub, shivering in the endless white, with a constant trickle running from its nose that it wipes and sniffles in the cold. The Pokédex treats this as its defining trait, this perpetual runny nose, and there is something almost tender in the image, a little creature alone in the blizzard, cold and sick and small. But the mountains it lives in are not tender, and the thing it grows into is not small, and the entries about its evolved form read like the confessions of people who survived something they should not have. Because Beartic, the great white bear that Cubone becomes, does not shiver, and it does not sniffle, and it is not pitiable in the slightest. It rules the frozen seas and the ice-locked peaks, and it hunts in a way the Pokédex describes with unusual and disturbing specificity. It breathes onto the water or onto its own claws, and freezes them solid, building fangs and blades of ice from its own breath, and then it goes into the black freezing water after its prey. It is powerful enough, the entries note, that it fears nothing, that it will attack anything that crosses into its territory, without hesitation and without mercy. In the white silence where no one can hear and no one will come, it is the top of every chain, and the reason the mountain is so quiet is that everything else has learned to be still when it passes. Think of the traveler lost in that blizzard, the way we imagined the child lost in the forest, the way we imagined the trainer at the top of the unlit stairs. The snow erases the path within minutes, the cold makes you slow, and then it makes you calm, and the calm is the most dangerous part, because it feels like rest, and somewhere in the white, something enormous is moving without sound, something with breath cold enough to forge its own weapons, something that fears nothing at all, and it has already noticed the warmth of a living body where no living body should be. The mountain does not need Beartic to be cruel. The cold does most of the work. Beartic only arrives at the end. Now let us take that same white silence and darken it, because higher still, or perhaps only deeper into legend, there is a creature the old mountain people refused to name aloud, and they had reasons. They spoke of a spirit of the snow, of a wanderer who died in a storm and never stopped walking. And in that world, the legend is not a metaphor. It has a face, and it has an entry, and the entry does not comfort anyone who reads it before bed. Higher up in the cold, or perhaps only deeper into the stories people tell when the wind claws at the windows, there is another kind of frozen horror that the Pokédex quietly confirms. It is not a wandering human ghost, but it is built from human fear, and it takes a shape that looks almost like a floating, grinning face carved out of ice. They call it Glalie, and the older entries describe it without any comforting gloss. Glalie, they say, can instantly freeze moisture in the atmosphere, creating blizzards out of clear air, and it has been known to freeze its prey solid and then devour them whole. That detail, devouring frozen prey, shows up more than once, not as a metaphor, but as a simple description of how it eats. In the high caves of Hoen's mountains, trainers have spoken of suddenly seeing their breath crystallize in front of them, of their jackets stiffening under an invisible shell of frost, moments before the floating black and white sphere, with its jagged horns and dead grin, drifts into view. Glalie's eyes are described as cold and merciless, and there are tales, the kind that start as Pokédex flavor and end as nightmares, of it fixating on a single moving thing in a snowfield, and simply freezing the entire area around that thing until nothing is left but a statue and a slow crunching sound. Its pre-evolution, Snorunt, seems almost comical in comparison. A squat little triangular creature that lives in snow houses and is said to bring good fortune to homes it visits. The entries note that families who live in cold regions sometimes welcome Snorunt into their houses, believing it will bring wealth, but that folklore sits uneasily beside the realities of the frozen world it inhabits. Snorunt lives in groups inside icebound structures, venturing out in blizzards, and eventually, some of those little visitors grow into Glalie. The smiling bringer of good luck becomes the floating head that turns the air itself into a weapon. The Pokédex never explains how the people in those houses feel when they realize what their guest will one day become. If we move from the mountains back down to inhabited places, the Pokédex's most unsettling entries start to center less on harsh climates and more on the behavior of specific ghost and dark types that live among humans. One of the clearest examples sits right at the edge of many roots, in the form of a perfectly ordinary-looking tree. Sudowoodo, the false tree Pokémon, is presented as comic relief, a creature that pretends to be a plant, but is actually rock type, blocking paths until someone uses water to make it move. But the line that matters tonight is the one that quietly describes how it stands so perfectly still for so long that people mistake it for a real tree. On its own, that's harmless. In the shadow of other entries, it becomes one more instance of the world being filled with things that look safe and are not. Far more directly dangerous are the ghosts that follow people home. Banette, for instance, is said to be a doll that was thrown away, whose hatred for the child that abandoned it turned it into a Pokémon. Its Pokédex entries specify that it wanders dark alleys and old houses, searching for the one who discarded it so that it can exact revenge. It keeps its cursed energy inside its zipper mouth, and if that zipper ever opens fully, the malice spills out. There is nothing metaphorical about its origin. It is explicitly a possessed, vengeful toy. And then there is Gengar, whose entries have grown darker with each generation. In several games, the Pokédex says outright that it hides in the shadow of a person or a traveler, quietly copying their movements, and that if a Gengar is nearby, the cold someone feels on their spine is not a draft, but the creature reaching for their soul. One entry notes that it steals the heat from the surrounding area, and another that it is said to emerge from darkness, to take the lives of those who get lost on mountain paths. Gengar began as a simple ghost-type introduction for early players. Over time, the official descriptions turned it into a stalking, soul-hunting predator that literally lives in your shadow. Shuppets and Duskull add to the pattern. Shuppet is drawn toward negative emotions. The Pokédex says it feeds on resentment and jealousy, flying through neighborhoods at night seeking those feelings. It is not a passive ghost. It actively seeks out the worst moods in human hearts and grows stronger from them. Duskull, meanwhile, is described as a soul collector that is famous for chasing children who misbehave. One entry says that it can pass through any wall to pursue someone, and that a child who misbehaves and encounters a Duskull may be dragged away by it. This is canon phrasing, a ghost that punishes children, not by frightening them, but by removing them. Among the most directly horrifying canon descriptions are those tied to the line we already touched once tonight, Drifloon and its evolution Drifblim. Drifblim Sussie's Pokédex entries follow naturally from Drifloon Sussie's. After Drifloon has gathered enough souls, enough passengers, it swells into the larger blimp-like form. The entries say that it carries people and Pokémon far away, and that those who travel with it sometimes never come back. One version mentions that no one knows where it takes those it carries. Canonically, the balloon that leads children into the sky grows into a larger vessel that drifts silently with unknown cargo and an unknown destination.
In Sinnoh and the regions beyond, the Pokédex becomes increasingly comfortable describing explicit death. Froslas, for example, is a ghost and ice type whose entries say that it was born from the soul of a woman who died lost in the mountains. There is your Fisno spirit's legend in its official form.
Frostlass lures unsuspecting men with its haunting voice, freezing them and decorating its lair with their frozen bodies. The games do not leave this as vague implication. They state that people who meet Frostlass, gaze in the blizzard, may be taken and displayed as ice sculptures. The ghost arose from a human death, and now adds more to the collection.
Even the seemingly gentle fairy types sometimes carry darker notes. Mimikyu, wrapped in a ragged Pikachu-like disguise, is described as a Pokémon whose true form instantly harms anyone who sees it. The cloth it wears is a way to interact with the world without killing the viewer.
The entries say that it will become violently enraged if someone damages its costume, because that costume is its only way to live among others. Fans often treat Mimikyu as tragic, and the text supports that reading, but underneath the sadness is a simple fact. Its real body is so wrong that sight itself is lethal. We can trace a line through all of these. Yamask, remembering its human life as it cries over its own face. Litwick and its evolved forms feeding on life force while pretending to guide you. Glalie, freezing prey and eating them whole. Banette and Frostlass born directly from human deaths and resentments. Gengar stealing warmth and souls from lost travelers. Shuppet and Duskull hunting emotions and children. Drifloon and Drifblim carrying the young away into the sky. Mimikyu hiding a lethal shape under cloth. Every detail we've used so far about what they do and what they are comes directly from one or more Pokédex entries in the mainline games, with our narration only slowing those facts down, unpacking the implications, and weaving them together. From individual creatures, the Pokédex and broader canon shift sometimes into landmarks and events, and those are where the horror steps out of the tall grass and into history. We have already brushed past the burned tower in Ecruteak in the earlier transcripts you shared. Canonically, the brass tower burned down in a mysterious fire. 3 nameless Pokémon died in that blaze. Ho-Oh descended and resurrected them, transforming them into the legendary beasts, Entei, Raikou, and Suicune. The games and companion lore textbooks state that the original forms of those 3 Pokémon are lost. No one knows what they were before they died. The resurrected beasts carry the element of their death, fire, lightning, rain, and roam endlessly, reminders of a catastrophe no one fully understands. Lavender Town's Pokémon Tower adds another layer. It is explicitly a graveyard, a multi-story mausoleum filled with tombstones and the restless dead. The ghosts the player encounters there, in the early games, are not metaphorical. They are actual spirit entities, cloaked in strange sprites, until you use the Sylph Scope to reveal them. The Cubone story we explored earlier is canonically tied to this tower. Team Rocket has killed Cubone's mother, Marowak, and her ghost haunts the stairs, blocking the player's path until she is calmed and allowed to pass on. The Pokédex and in-game events reinforce the idea that Lavender Town is where the dead gather and where unresolved grief, like Cubone's, literally takes ghostly form.
Outside Kanto, we encounter AZ and the ultimate weapon in Kalos, a piece of history that the games lay out in detail. 3,000 years before the events of Pokémon X and Y, a great war ravaged Kalos. AZ, the king, built a massive machine, the ultimate weapon, to end the war by annihilating the opposing army. Its firing consumed the life energy of countless Pokémon, resurrected AZ's own partner, and devastated the land. The weapon is still embedded in the region, a looming reminder that human desperation can bend the laws of life and death in ways that bleed directly into Pokémon biology. Later, Pokédex entries about Floette and other Kalos Pokémon reference that event, calling AZ's Floette the eternal flower form, and linking it to the weapon's stolen vitality. Unknown, and their strange glyph-filled ruins connect lore back to the fabric of reality itself. Unknown's entries say that these letter-shaped Pokémon communicate via mysterious symbols, that they can distort reality when they gather in large numbers, and that there may be a link between them and the legendary Pokémon that govern dimensions. Official sources present them as living hieroglyphs, tied to ancient scripts and the creation myths in Sinnoh and Johto. The ruins where they appear, the ruins of Alph, the Solaceon ruins, are always framed as places where something older than recorded history is still trying to speak.
The pattern, across creatures and places and events, is clear if you take the time in the dark to follow it. The Pokédex is not simply a cheerfully colored bestiary. It is a horror anthology written in plain scientific language. It tells you, again and again, that Pokémon can be the souls of the dead, the weapons of ancient wars, the manifestations of human emotions, the predators that lure children, the collectors of spirits, the living aftermath of catastrophes. Our narration tonight is staying very close to those printed lines, only stretching them into slow, sleep-friendly storytelling. Let us sink now into Lavender Town. Because of all the places in that world, none has gathered the dead so openly, and none has hidden its horror so poorly behind cheerful design. Lavender Town in Kanto is not a city of shops and gyms and battling children. It is a town built around a tower for the dead. Pokémon Tower rises in the center of it, floor upon floor of gravestones, a place where trainers bring the bodies of Pokémon that have died so that their spirits can rest. The music that plays there, in the earliest games, is unlike anything else in the region, a thin and dissonant melody that generations of players have described as unsettling in a way they could never quite name. The town does not pretend to be happy. It simply endures, quiet and gray, a settlement whose entire purpose is to sit beside the dead and keep them company. And on the upper floors, the dead do not stay entirely still. The player, climbing the tower, encounters ghosts, and at first, the game will not even let you see them clearly, rendering them only as a shapeless white specter that cannot be identified or fought. You are told, in effect, that there is something here your eyes are not equipped to understand. Only when you acquire the Sylph Scope, a device explicitly built to reveal what the human eye cannot, does the specter resolve into a form, and the form is a Marowak, a mother.
Her Pokédex identity is the same lonely, grieving creature we met at the beginning of the night, the one that once wore the skull, grown now into the bone-wielding adult, and she is dead, and she is furious, and she will not move.
The canonical events fill in the horror that the sprite only hints at. Team Rocket, the criminal syndicate that runs through Kanto like rot through old wood, came to this tower, and they killed her. They wanted the land, or the resources, or simply the power that comes from taking what is not theirs, and a Marowak stood in their way protecting her child, and they struck her down.
Her spirit did not pass on. It rose, restless and enraged, and it planted itself on the stairs of the tower, blocking the way, attacking anyone who tried to climb higher, because her child was still out there, and she could not, would not, leave. The player must fight her.
You raise your own Pokémon against the ghost of a murdered mother, and only when she is defeated, only when she is finally at peace, does she vanish and let you pass. That is a canonical battle in a game marketed to children. You calm a slain parent enough to let her die a second time.
And her child, the orphaned Cubone we opened the night with, is somewhere below, and the skull it wears is now the most terrible object in the entire region, because we know whose skull it is. We watched, in a sense, how it came to be. The cycle we described in the abstract at the very start of the night has a face here, and a name, and a murderer, and a grave.
Everything the Pokédex told us in its flat, clinical voice about a small creature that wears its dead mother's skull and cries into the bone at night, all of it converges on this single tower, in this single gray town, and it turns out the entry was not a general observation about a species. It was, at least once, a report of a crime.
There is more woven through Lavender Town that the games only whisper. The radio tower nearby broadcasts to the whole region, and in the folklore that has grown up around this place, the signals and the ghosts and the strange music all tangle together into a sense that Lavender Town is a kind of threshold, a thin place where the boundary between the living and the dead has worn through from centuries of grief pressing against it. The channelers who tend the tower speak with the dead directly, possessed by the spirits in their care. The ghost-type Pokémon that gather here are drawn, like Shuppet to resentment and Duskull to fear, by the sheer density of loss.
A town that exists only to hold the dead will, inevitably, hold more of them than it was ever built to contain.
And this is where the deeper unease of Lavender Town settles over you in the dark. Every region in that world has a place like this.
The Pokémon that die must go somewhere, and the ones that die unquietly, murdered like Marowak, or lost like the children who became Phantump, or drowned like the souls inside Drifloon, do not simply fade. They accumulate.
They gather in towers and forests and frozen lairs and the shadows behind lost travelers. The cheerful surface of that world floats on top of an enormous and growing population of the dead, and the Pokédex, entry by entry, is the only document that admits it. The professors who write those entries are not naive. They know exactly what they are cataloging. They write it down plainly, precisely because there is no other honest way to write it. And then they hand the device to a 10-year-old and send that child out into the tall grass to meet these things face to face. Consider the child at the center of it all, the trainer, the one whose hands hold the Pokédex, and the Sylph Scope, and the little spheres full of caught souls. That child walks into the Tower of the Dead alone. That child fights the ghost of a murdered mother. That child descends to find the orphan, and, more often than not, catches it and carries it away, skull and grief and all, to raise it and evolve it and send it into battle. We tell ourselves this is a story about friendship, and in the daylight it is. But at night, reading the entries one at a time in the glow of the screen, it starts to look like something else. It starts to look like a child moving calmly through a world of the dead, collecting them and never once being told to be afraid. That is the true shape of the disturbing Pokédex, the thing that emerges only when you stop skipping the text and start reading it in the dark. It is not any single monster. It is the accumulation. It is the sheer, patient volume of loss recorded in that little book. One gentle-looking creature at a time, and the calm, untroubled voice that records it, and the bright music that never stops playing over any of it. Let us leave the grey quiet of Lavender behind and travel across the sea to Johto, to the old city of Ecruteak, where two towers once stood side by side against the sky. One of them still stands, tall and proud, the Tin Tower, sometimes called the Bell Tower, its rafters silent now, but once home to something radiant.
The other is a ruin.
They call it the Burned Tower, and the name is not decoration.
It is a description of a night when everything went wrong. A night the people of Ecruteak have never stopped whispering about. Because on that night, 3 Pokémon died, and something older than the city reached down and refused to let them stay dead.
The canonical story is stark.
Long ago, a great fire consumed the Brass Tower, the twin of the tower that still stands.
Lightning is said to have struck it, or perhaps the fire came some other way, but the result was the same.
The tower burned, and inside it, 3 nameless Pokémon were caught in the blaze and killed.
We do not know what they were. That is the detail the lore insists upon and never resolves. Their original forms are lost.
Whatever species they had been in life, whatever shapes they wore before the fire took them, all of it burned away, and no record survives. They died as 3 anonymous creatures in a collapsing tower, and if the story had ended there, it would only be a sad footnote in the history of a single city.
But Ho-Oh descended, the great rainbow-winged Pokémon, the Guardian said to circle above the Tin Tower, came down to the smoking ruin of its twin, and it looked upon the 3 small bodies in the ash, and it brought them back. Not as they were. It could not restore what the fire had erased.
Instead, it remade them, breathing new life and new form into the dead, and they rose transformed, carrying the elements of the disaster that had killed them. One rose wreathed in fire, and became Entei, whose body is said to hold the eruption of a volcano. One rose crackling with the lightning that may have struck the tower, and became Raikou, thunder given a running shape. And one rose from the rain that fell to quench the flames, and became Suicune, the north wind and the pure water that washes the world clean. Sit with what that means in the dark. These are not gods that were born whole from the beginning of the world, the way Arceus and the creation trio were. These are dead creatures, resurrected, still carrying the shape of their own deaths. Every time Entei roars and the ground trembles with volcanic heat, it is reenacting the fire. Every time Raikou tears across the plains, it is the lightning that fell that night. And Suicune, purest of the three, the one that runs across the surface of water and cleanses whatever it touches, is the rain that fell too late to save them. The legendary beasts of Johto are beautiful and revered, and children chase them across the region, hoping to catch even a glimpse. But underneath, the reverence is a grave, and 3 bodies no one could name, and a fire that never truly went out, because it lives now in 3 immortal creatures that will never be allowed to rest. And Suicune's endless running takes on a different color once you know this. The lore says Suicune roams the world without stopping, purifying tainted water wherever it finds it, forever moving, forever restless. We call that a noble purpose, but a thing that was pulled back from death and can never sit still, that must run and run across an entire world without end, might not experience its own existence as noble at all. It might experience it as a sentence. The people of Ecruteak built a whole culture of dance and ritual around these 3, around Ho-Oh and its resurrected beasts, and they treat the burned tower as sacred ground. But sacred and haunted are often the same place seen in different light, and the burned tower is both. Now let us travel farther still, west and back through time, to the region of Kalos, where beauty and horror have always been braided together, and where the single most devastating event in recorded Pokémon history sits buried beneath a modern city like a splinter that never worked its way out. 3,000 years ago, Kalos was at war. The details of who fought whom have softened in the retelling, but the scale of it has not. It was a long and terrible war, and among those caught in it was a king, an unusually tall man the histories simply call Azed, and the one thing in the world he loved was not a throne or a kingdom, but a single small Floette, a flower Pokémon, his companion through everything.
The war took her. She went off to fight, as Pokémon did in that age, and she did not come back. And AZ, drowning in a grief we have watched smaller creatures drown in all night long, the same grief that made Cubone wear the skull and Yamask weep into the mask, did what a king with unlimited resources and a broken heart might do. He built a machine. The histories call it the ultimate weapon, and its first purpose was resurrection. AZ used it to bring his Floette back to life, and it worked. She returned to him, but the machine did not create life from nothing, it took life. To restore one small Floette, the weapon consumed the life energy of countless other Pokémon, draining them to fuel the miracle, and AZ, in his grief, let it. That alone would be a horror worthy of the darkest Pokédex entry. But the story does not stop at resurrection. When AZ's Floette saw what her return had cost, when she understood that she lived because so many others had been drained to death, she left him.
She could not stay beside a love that had been paid for in that currency. And AZ, having lost her a second time, having lost her precisely because of what he did to get her back, turned the ultimate weapon to its second purpose.
He aimed it at the war itself, and he fired it not to save a life, but to end thousands, unleashing its stored energy across the battlefield in a blast of light that annihilated the opposing army and brought the war to a sudden, absolute close. The land has never fully recovered.
The weapon is still there, in canon, buried beneath the region, its enormous flower-shaped superstructure dormant but intact, capable in the events of the games of being fired again. And AZ himself is still there too, because the same energies that touched his Floette touched him, and he did not die.
He was made immortal, cursed to walk the world for 3,000 years, carrying the memory of exactly what he had done, searching for the companion who fled from him, unable to age, unable to end, unable to forget. He is Yamask's grief, written across 3 millennia.
He is the human version of every soul-carrying, life-draining, death-haunted creature we have met tonight. And he is canon, a living character the player can meet, still walking, still searching, still holding the memory of the light. That is the shape the disturbing Pokédex finally reveals when you follow it all the way down. It begins with a small creature wearing a skull in a cave, and if you refuse to skip the entries, if you read every one in the dark and let each implication arrive, it leads you here, to an immortal king and a buried weapon and a war ended by draining the living to fuel a single act of love turned to slaughter.
The gentle-looking monsters and the world-ending machine are the same story at different scales. Grief that will not let go, life taken to hold onto life, the dead refusing, or being refused, the right to simply be gone.
Let us descend now, beneath Sinnoh, into the cold stone chambers where an older writing waits on the walls, in the ruins of Alph in Johto, and again in the Solaceon ruins of Sinnoh. The walls are covered in symbols, and the symbols are alive. They are the unknown, Pokémon shaped like the letters of an alphabet, each one a single character hovering in the dark, and the canonical entries treat them as something closer to language than to life. They are said to communicate through telepathy, to appear in shapes resembling ancient writing, and no one is certain whether the writing imitates the Pokémon or the Pokémon imitate the writing. When they gather, the lore warns, something happens to the space around them. Their combined presence is said to be able to distort reality, to bend the rules of the world, as though a sentence written in enough of them could rewrite whatever it described. That is the quiet terror of the unknown. They are not predators. They do not lure children or drain life or wear the faces of the dead. They are worse in a colder way. They are the suggestion that the world itself is written, that beneath the tall grass and the towns and the towers there is a text, and that these small floating letters are fragments of it, still hovering in the ruins, still spelling out something no living scholar has managed to fully read. The professors who study them come away unsettled, because every attempt to decode the unknown circles back to the creation myths, to Arceus and the shaping of reality, and to the possibility that what we call the natural world is only the surface of a language someone, or something, once wrote and could presumably write again. And that language points downward, past the ruins, past the stone, into a place that should not exist. The Sinnoh myths speak of Arceus shaping time and space, and of the 3 it made to govern them. And here we arrive at the one that was cast out, Giratina, the renegade. The canonical lore is unflinching about its exile. Giratina's nature was too violent, too wild, too opposed to the order Arceus was building, and so it was banished, sealed away not in a cave or a tower, but in an entire separate dimension built to contain it, a place called the Distortion World. The Distortion World is the closest the games have ever come to depicting a nightmare as geography. It is a realm where gravity does not agree with itself, where waterfalls climb and platforms float, and the horizon folds back on itself, where the ordinary laws that hold the world together are simply suspended. Time is said not to flow there the way it does here. Giratina rules it alone, and has ruled it alone for an unimaginable span, watching our world through the thin places where the 2 dimensions touch, occasionally reaching through. It is described as living on the reverse side of our reality, in the shadow of everything, and the implication that the games never quite say aloud is that it is always there, on the other side of every mirror and every still surface and every moment of stillness, exiled but never truly gone, holding a grudge as old as creation itself.
And then there is the light that hungers, out beyond even that.
In the region of Alola, the games introduced the Ultra Beasts, creatures that come from another dimension entirely, through tiers in the sky called Ultra Wormholes. They are not native Pokémon, they are invaders, and the Pokédex treats them with genuine alarm, classifying them not with the usual calm but with warnings, describing them as dangerous, as poorly understood, as potentially catastrophic to the ecosystem. But the true horror among them, the one that ties the whole night together, is Necrozma. Necrozma is described as a creature of light that has run out of it. Once, the lore suggests, it shone, a being of radiance from beyond the stars. But something happened, some ancient loss, and now it is starved, a crystalline black shape driven by a single, overwhelming hunger for the light it no longer has. And so it takes light. The canonical events describe it capturing Solgaleo, or Lunala, the very Pokémon that embody the sun and the moon, seizing them, fusing with them, and using them to drain the light out of the world itself. In its most terrible form, it threatens to plunge everything into permanent darkness, feeding on the radiance of an entire region, an eternal predator whose prey is not flesh or soul, but light. Follow the thread one last time, all the way from where we started. A small creature crying into its mother's skull in a cave, a balloon full of screaming souls drifting toward a playground, a candle that drinks your life while pretending to guide you, a murdered mother's ghost on the stairs of a tower, 3 dead things pulled back into immortal shapes that carry their own deaths forever, an immortal king and a buried weapon that ended a war by draining the living, a dimension of broken physics holding an exiled god, and at the far edge of everything, a starving light that would swallow the sun. It is all one story, told at every scale the Pokédex can reach, from the smallest orphan to the hunger at the end of the universe. Loss that will not let go, life taken to sustain life, the dark that is always, patiently, waiting just past the edge of the light. From the distortion world and the hungry light above Alola, let's sink back down into something smaller again, because the Pokédex does not only speak in grand, cosmic terms. Some of its most unsettling entries are about things that never leave the ground at all. In Hoenn and later regions, there is a family of Pokemon built from stone and seal. They are the Regis, Regirock, Regis, and Registeel, and their leader, Regigigas. Canonically, they are ancient golems, colossal beings that once shaped continents and were later shackled and sealed away. Regigigas, in particular, is described as having towed continents with ropes, dragging the land itself into place. Its Pokédex entries say it built the land where people now live, and then, at some point, it was bound, its colossal strength tamped down and locked inside a chamber, with inscriptions and puzzles that must be solved before it can awaken. Regirock, Regis, and Registeel each carry similar implications. They are made of pure material, rock, ice, and steel, their bodies described as constructs rather than natural growths. The Pokédex notes that Regirock's parts can be regenerated by absorbing rocks, that Regice's body is composed of Antarctic ice that never melts, and that Registeel's metal body is harder than any known substance. In the games, they are found sealed in ancient chambers, deep underground, accessible only by following cryptic instructions written on walls. The implication is clear. Someone long ago feared what these beings could do if left awake. So they locked them up, and they left a code behind, not to free them, but perhaps to warn the future about what would happen if someone did. That pattern, power sealed away, bound by writing, echoes down into another corner of Sinnoh's lore, where the Pokédex introduces a Pokémon whose very body is said to contain countless spirits. Spiritomb. Its entries are blunt. Spiritomb is formed from 108 spirits bound to a keystone. It was sealed away long ago as punishment for misdeeds. The number 108 appears because, canonically, there were 108 separate entities, 108 souls, confined together. The stone they are trapped in is placed in the ground, and the game teaches you to interact with it, to talk to it, and eventually Spiritomb emerges, a swirling, face-studded mass of purple ghostly smoke, the keystone glowing underneath. One entry says that it was, in the distant past, a collection of spirits that caused trouble and had to be punished. Another notes that it may still be bound to the keystone even as it fights. The idea that 108 individual souls, each once their own person or Pokémon, have been forced into a single consciousness, trapped together, never allowed to separate or rest, and left to stew in their own mischief for centuries before someone uncorks them. That is a horror the games never linger on in dialogue, but the Pokédex writes it down plainly.
It is one of the few places where the text itself admits that the world once felt the need to imprison spirits forever. Not all possession in the Pokédex is limited to stones and towers. Sometimes it takes over bodies. Paris and Parasect are perhaps the clearest example, and their entries are infamous for how little mercy they show. Paris starts as a small bug Pokémon with mushrooms growing on its back. The mushrooms are parasitic fungi, and the Pokédex describes them as controlling the bug's growth, feeding on nutrients taken from tree roots, and being highly valued as medicine. There is discomfort there, but Paris is still, at least partially, itself. Parasect is what happens when the fungus finishes its work.
In nearly every game, the Pokédex describes Parasect as a Pokémon whose body is now completely taken over by the mushroom. One entry says bluntly that the checked pattern on its shell is the mushroom, and that the insect is but a husk. Another notes that its eyes are now blank and empty, and that the mushroom directs all its movements. It spreads spores that are toxic to surrounding plants, devastating forests as it goes. The actual Paras is gone. Its body walks, but the fungus controls it entirely, using it as a vessel to spread itself. That is canon, a Pokémon line whose evolution is, in effect, the death of the original creature and the triumph of a parasite. Think again of the child walking through the tall grass with a Pokédex in hand. The device doesn't hide this. It describes Parasect in exactly these terms: a hollowed-out host, a puppet of a fungus that doesn't particularly care what the host used to be. A curious trainer who reads that entry is still encouraged to catch and battle with it. They are not told to fear it, or to pity it, or to stay away. They are told, in the same neutral voice that tells them a Pidgey's wingspan, that this thing used to be alive and is now only moved by something that grew out of its back. The notion of lost will appears again in a different way in the line of Hypno. Hypno's Pokédex entries, especially in early generations, are some of the most notorious. The text explicitly says that it puts people to sleep using a pendulum, and that it carries a pendulum that it swings to hypnotize, then eats dreams. Several entries mention that children are a common target. One version says that it has sometimes been known to take away children it hypnotized, leading to stories of missing kids. Another describes a cautionary tale in which parents warn their children not to stray too far, lest Hypno put them to sleep and drag them off. Canonically, Hypno walks quietly through towns, humming and swinging its pendulum, feeding on dreams, and the world has simply accepted that this is part of the ecosystem. The police in one region are shown warning people about a Hypno that has been causing trouble, but they do not treat its existence as impossible or aberrant. It is just how things are. There is a creature out there whose hobby is especially children, whose preferred food is what their minds see when they are vulnerable, and occasionally it forgets the line between feeding and kidnapping. The Pokédex writes this down like a field note and moves on. Sometimes, the horror sits in one line that seems almost throwaway. In the case of Drowsy, Hypno, Mal, Nars 2, Nars 2, Nars 2's pre-evolution, one entry says that if it eats someone, Nars 2, Nars 2's, Nars 2's, dreams, and finds them particularly tasty, it will continue to visit that person night after night. The idea that a Poké9mon might mark a sleeping person as a favorite meal, returning without their knowledge over and over to feed on the deepest parts of their unconscious, fits perfectly with the gentle dread this script has been tracing. You are asleep. You cannot see who stands at the foot of your bed. The Poké9dex can. There are other bodies taken over in different ways. Goribus, a beautiful sleek fish from Hoenn, is described as feeding on the bodily fluids of its prey, as inserting its thin mouth into openings and draining them, growing brighter the more it feeds. Malamar, in Kalos, is said to use powerful hypnotic waves to manipulate others, including humans, to carry out evil deeds, and official text mentions that it has been employed in real-world-like criminal activity because of how effectively it can control minds. These are not vague E2, 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 E2 dark to E2, E2, E2 creatures. They are, in canon, predators of thought and blood. If we gather them all on the same mental stage, Aik1 He, Regis sealed in stone, Spiritomb Sty's multitude bound to a keystone, Parasect's body controlled by fungus, Hypno harvesting dreams and sometimes children, Drowsy marking favorite minds, Malamar rewriting will, Wei see again the pattern that has been present from the first line of this script. The Pokédex does not shy away from turning its world into a catalogue of ways a self can be overwritten, sometimes by grief, sometimes by possession, sometimes by ancient punishment, sometimes by subtle, patient feeding. And then, once more, the perspective widens, as if the device itself begins to realize the implications of everything it has recorded. At the end of each game, after you read enough entries, the Pokédex is listed as filled, complete, or at least filled, and you are congratulated for your diligence. But if you look at what you have actually collected, entry after entry, it starts to resemble something else entirely. Not a trophy case of cute creatures, but a written record of an ecosystem where death, control, and loss of self are built into the basic rules. This is what makes the fin-disturbing Pokédex so powerful as a sleep story subject. You do not have to invent horrors. You only have to read what is there, slowly, in the dark, letting each neutral line sink to the bottom of your mind and sit there. Cubone's skull, Drifloon's souls, Yamask's human grief, Litwick's feeding flame, Frostlass's ice-decorated victims, Spiritomb's 108 bound spirits, Parasect's parasitic fungus, Hypno's missing children, Necrozma's hunger for light, AZ's immortal regret. The device's bright red shell hides what its text does not. That is the story. The horror has always been there, printed in small font, waiting for someone to treat it as more than trivia. The forest we passed through earlier, where Phantump calls in the voices of lost children, has another guardian that the Pokédex quietly turns into one of the most frightening entities in the natural world, Trevenant. When Phantump evolves, it becomes this towering, twisted tree, its trunk split into a jagged mouth, its eyes glowing from within, its branches like skeletal arms.
The entries say that Trevenant can control the trees of the forest, making them move at its will, and that it is fiercely protective of the woods it inhabits.
It is not the gentle protector some imagine either. Canonically, it is said to trap those who harm the forest, preventing them from ever leaving. One Pokédex line mentions that it will wrap its roots around intruders and keep them imprisoned until the forest has judged them. Another notes that travelers who disrespect the woods sometimes disappear, never seen again, and are believed to have been claimed by Trevenant and its arboreal allies. The same forest that turned dead children into Phantump now has a warden who can marshal every tree, every root, every branch into an extension of its will. You walk between trunks, thinking they are just wood, and the Pokédex calmly informs you that they may in fact be limbs waiting for a signal. Gengar returns here as well, because the shadows beneath those trees are exactly the kind of places it likes to hide. Gengar's canon behavior, slipping into silhouettes, stealing heat, laughing as it watches its victims lose their way, fits perfectly into the wider tapestry. It appears not only on mountain paths, but in alleyways and rooms, in any place where the light is thin and a shadow can stretch.
Several entries say that it wishes to curse its victims, and that it takes joy in causing misfortune.
It started as a friendly-looking ghost in early art, but the text underneath has turned it into something closer to a demon over the generations. And beyond that, there are more ultra beasts whose entries read like field reports from an invasion. Buzzwole, the muscular mosquito-like creature, is described as absorbing energy from the fluids of its prey, flexing as it does so, its body swelling with stolen power. Pheromosa is said to detest all forms of uncleanliness and to move with speed and elegance that make it hard to track, but its presence is still framed as alien and dangerous. Xurkitree resembles a bundle of sparking cables, and the Pokédex notes that it roams around power plants, sometimes wrapping its limbs around electrical sources and draining them to feed its needs. These are not just weird designs. They are written as invasive species whose habits threaten the stability of the regions they visit. Even in more everyday Pokémon, the entries drop hints that, taken slowly, add weight to the atmosphere of the world.
Absol, for instance, is famous in canon for appearing before disasters.
The Pokédex repeatedly clarifies that Absol does not cause the catastrophes. It senses them and comes to warn people. But humans misread its presence and blame it, driving it away. So it roams the mountains, misunderstood, showing up before landslides, storms, and other tragedies, always the harbinger, never the cause. Its existence implies that the world is rife with disasters large enough to have their own dedicated warning creature, and that people's relationship with doom is so complicated they exile the messenger. There is a quiet horror even in how time is handled. Celebi, the time-traveling mythical, is described as moving through eras, appearing in forests, leaving behind glimpses of different ages. The Pokédex calls it a guardian of the forest and of time, but its ability to slip between moments means that the line between past and present is not as solid as it might seem. The world's history can be revisited, altered, witnessed in ways that normal beings cannot manage. In a setting already haunted by dead mothers, trapped spirits, and immortal kings, the existence of a creature that moves softly through time adds another layer of unease. The idea that none of these tragedies are truly confined to back then. They can be touched again, felt again, perhaps even repeated. As you listen to all of this in the dark, the cumulative effect is what carries you towards sleep. Each individual entry is small, a line about a skull here, a note about a balloon there, a mention of a fungus on a bug's back, but slowed down and woven together, they become a single long, low hum. The world of Pokémon, as recorded by its own scientists, is a place where death is common, where spirits linger, where bodies are taken over, where ancient weapons lie dormant, where hungry lights lurk beyond the sky, where even the gentlest forest has roots that can hold you in place. And yet, in canon, people live there, children still leave home with backpacks and partner Pokémon, professors still hand out Pokédexes, towns still build radio towers above graveyards, and festivals are held in cities whose underbellies hide the remnants of apocalyptic machines. The disturbing Pokédex is not a secret text found in corners of the internet. It is the same official entries everyone has access to. Simply read with attention and allowed to stretch out into a story like this one. You can feel, as the narrative slows, how the horror softens into a kind of melancholy. Cubone's lonely vigil in the caves, Drifloon's patient drifting at the edge of fog, Yamask's quiet crying into its mask, Spiritom's crowded keystone, AZ's endless walk beneath the sky. All of them begin to feel less like jump scares and more like sad facts of a universe that was always going to mix wonder with sorrow. The Pokédex recorded both. Our script has simply chosen to linger on the sorrow, to turn it into something calm enough to fall asleep to. Think, for a moment, about how many of these creatures are tied not just to death, but to specific human emotions. The Pokédex is clear about this in several cases. Shuppet, as we touched on earlier, is literally drawn to jealousy and resentment. It flutters through neighborhoods at night, seeking those feelings out, feeding on them until dawn. The idea that a ghost might treat human grudges like nectar says something quiet and unsettling about how prevalent those grudges must be. It would not survive if they were rare. In a way, Shuppet's existence is an admission that under the surface of all those cheerful roots and cities, there is enough unspoken bitterness to support a whole species. Similarly, Miss Magius and its pre-evolution Misdreavus play with fear directly. Misdreavus is described as dwelling in dark caves and spooking people with its cries, feeding off their fear. If someone screams in fright, it grows stronger. Mismagius, the evolved form, can cast curses with its incantation-like cries, and the Pokédex notes that its voice can cause both happiness and sadness, depending on what spell it chooses. These entries turn emotional states into ecosystems. Fear is food. Words themselves are weapons. The ghosts are not just haunting space, they are haunting the interior of people's minds.
Some canonical entries lean into outright body horror. Take Gourgeist, for example. This pumpkin-shaped ghost and grass Pokémon comes in different sizes, and one of its Pokédex lines says that it sings in eerie voices on dark nights, inviting children to its home. Those who join its singing are said never to return.
Another notes that its hair-like tendrils wrap around its victims and drain their life force. The design looks festive, almost Halloween-like, but the text tells you that beneath the smiling jack-o'-lantern face is a predator that takes children in and keeps them. Pumpkaboo, its pre-evolution, is said to carry wandering spirits inside its body, ferrying them between worlds. The games describe it as a vessel for the dead, its hollow pumpkin interior literally filled with lost souls. Combined, Pumpkaboo and Gourgeist paint a picture of a whole lineage devoted to movement and consumption of spirits, a family of living lanterns that both transport and devour. The sea holds its share of canon horror as well. Sharpedo is framed as a torpedo-like predator that can swim incredibly fast, and the Pokédex says entire shoals of them have been known to tear apart ships. It is called the Bully of the Sea, but that nickname hides how often the text describes it attacking boats, biting through hulls, and driving people to fear the ocean. Frillish and Jellicent, the ghostly jellyfish line, go even further. Jellicent's entries talk about ships and crews vanishing without a trace in the waters it haunts, hinting that entire vessels have been dragged down by unseen arms. One version outright says that it preys on humans, turning the sea around it into a hunting ground.
Even some fossil Pokémon carry disturbing implications. Kabutops, resurrected from ancient shell fragments, is described as slashing its prey with its sickle-like arms and then draining their body fluids. Its evolved form moves swiftly underwater and uses its blades with surgical accuracy. The fact that fossils brought back to life immediately resume such predatory behavior is another reminder that the line between extinct and just waiting is thin in this world. The scientists revive them to study the past. The past starts feeding on the present.
In Kalos and Galar, canonical entries introduce yet more creatures whose existence hints at problems no one quite solved. Phantump and Trevenant's haunted forest sits alongside tales of Pangoro, leading small Pokémon gangs in urban areas, breaking rules to protect their turf. Grimmsnarl, a dark and fairy type from Galar, is said to use its hair like wires to entangle foes, its body capable of manipulating its own growth in ways that look more like horror than heroism. It crouches behind bravado and smiles, but its description is all about control and constriction. And then there are the 9 ordinary ghosts we almost forget about. Ghastly, a ball of gas said to be made of poisonous substances, can suffocate opponents by surrounding them. Haunter, floating hands and a grin, is described as licking its victims to steal their life force, and there are lines warning that being licked by Haunter can lead to a slow, fatal weakening. Gengar, as we Sove already traced, finishes that line by stepping fully into predation. These 3 are the original ghost-type introductions, and the Poké9 Dex did not hold back even then. It told you from the start that some creatures here kill with suffocation and touch. What makes all of this work as sleep content rather than pure terror is the way you hear it. Read quickly. These entries are odd bits of trivia you might mention to a friend. Did you know Hypno has an entry about a missing child? Then, did you know Spiritomb is 108 souls? Read slowly, at night, in a voice that lets each image bloom and then drift away. They turn into a long, low story about a world where every corner has something quietly wrong in it. You are not being asked to be scared, you are being invited to notice. And noticing, in itself, is oddly soothing. There is also a kind of comfort in the consistency of it. Once you recognize the patterns, Hick one he orphan, and the skull, the balloon and the souls, the candle and the flame, the fungus and the hollowed shell, the king and the weapon, Hick one, you start to see how the universe holds those patterns gently, rather than chaotically. The horrors are not random, they are described, catalogued, named, confined to entries that you can scroll past or stop and read. The scientists wrote them down because they wanted to understand, and that desire to understand, even the worst parts of the world, is something you can rest in. As you imagine the trainer lying in bed, Pokédex open, scrolling through these lines by the light of a Pokégear screen, you can almost feel yourself joining them. The cave with Cubones crying becomes a picture you can hold and then let go. The foggy dock where Drifloon waits becomes a distant scene, far from your own window. The distortion world and Necrozma's hungry light stay at the edge of the cosmos, never crossing into your room. Your mind, which might have been busy with other worries, now has something definite to think about, something framed by canon, limited by text. That definiteness is part of why people fall asleep to this kind of narration. It takes the vague unease of the day and trades it for a clear, strange story you can follow until your thoughts slow down. Some of the most quietly disturbing details in the Pokédex aren't even about overtly scary species. They're tucked into entries for creatures that, at first glance, look cute or harmless. That contrast, appearance versus behavior, is part of what makes this lore work so well for the kind of long, eerie, sleep-focused story you're building. Take Wobbuffet. In art, it's a simple blue figure with a wide, empty smile, standing still. The Pokédex emphasizes that stillness. Wobbuffet doesn't attack on its own. It only retaliates, using counter and mirror coat to send damage back. One entry explains that it hides its true body inside the black tail-like part, and that it becomes frantic if anyone tries to peek. Another warns that if its body is damaged, it may unleash all the energy it has stored. There's an implication there of something sealed and explosive behind the buffoonish pose, a tension between comic design and dangerous potential. Similarly, there are notes about poor living conditions and neglect that slip into entries for more ordinary Pokémon. Granbull, the fairy bulldog, is described as having intimidating jaws that scare away friends, leaving it lonely despite its gentle nature. Ariados, the spider, is said to weave sticky webs and use them to trap and drain prey until there is nothing left. A straight-line predatory description you might see in a documentary, but which sits strangely inside a game with badges and contests. Lantern's glowing lure attracts fish, which it then shocks and devours. Many water types, Huntail, Carvanha, Basculin, are openly written as savage predators of rivers and seas. What ties all this together is the way the world's inhabitants seem to accept it. The Pokédex doesn't describe these behaviors with moral judgment, it simply notes them. People in that world herd Mareep for wool, even though the Pokédex says Mareep's fleece stores static electricity that can shock anyone who touches it. They farm Miltank for milk, even as entries mention that Miltank can be dangerous when angered. They let children roam forests where Trevenant and Phantump exist, seas where Jellicent and Sharpedo hunt, cities where Malamar and Hypno can manipulate minds. The horror isn't just in the creatures, it's in the way the whole system has evolved to treat that horror as ordinary. On a more cosmic level, the legendary and mythical Pokémon we've touched on, Arceus, Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, Ho-Oh, Necrozma, Az's Floette, carry stories that blur the line between myth and physics. Arceus's creation of time and space, Giratina's banishment to the distortion world, Necrozma's theft of light, and Az's use of the ultimate weapon, all form a backbone of canon, where entire regions have been reshaped by single traumatic events. The Pokédex and in-game dialogue don't hide this. They talk about continents towed, oceans flooded, Skies torn open, wars ended in blinding flashes. For a child playing through the story, these are set pieces. For someone listening at night, they become the deep background hum behind every smaller tragedy, the reason the world feels so old and so tired. And yet, the narrative you're building refuses to turn that into panic. The voice stays slow. Each entry is a vignette. Cubone under the moonlight in the cave, Drifloon at the foggy dock, Yamask drifting with its mask, Litwick leading you down a hallway, Frostlass in the blizzard, Spiritomb at the keystone, Parasect moving under fungal command, Hypno swinging its pendulum, Necrozma looming over the sky, AZ walking beneath his weapon's shadow. By moving from one image to the next with a steady rhythm, the script turns fear into atmosphere, something the listener can sink into rather than flinch from. Tonight, we have wandered a long way with the Pokédex open in our hands. We started in a cave, listening to a small Cubone cry into its mother's skull.
And then followed a Drifloon as it drifted patiently at the edge of a foggy dock, waiting for tiny hands to reach out.
We watched Yamask clutch its own former face, remembering a human life that will never come back, and we walked behind Litwick's flickering flame as it led us deeper into a hallway that grew colder with every step. We climbed the stairs of Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town and stood in front of Marowak's ghost, feeling the weight of a mother's anger and love. And then we crossed the sea to Ekritik to stand in the ruin of the burned tower, where 3 nameless Pokémon died and rose again as Entei, Raikou, and Suicune, each one carrying the element of its own death, like a scar that never heals. We walked alongside AZ beneath Kalos's sky, 3,000 years after he fired the ultimate weapon, listening to him talk about a single Floette whose resurrection cost countless lives and whose departure left him immortal and alone. We looked up into the distortion world, where Giratina rules a broken dimension of tilted gravity and twisting paths, and then beyond even that, toward Necrozma, starving for light at the edge of everything. We peered into ruins where unknown hover like living letters, hinting that reality itself might be written. We pressed our hand against the keystone that binds 108 spirits into Spiritomb's swirling mass. We stood at the edge of the forest, hearing Phantump call in the voices of dead children and Trevenant wrap roots around the trunks, ready to trap anyone who harms the woods. We watched Parasect move under the command of the fungus that hollowed out its body, and Hypno swing its pendulum, feeding on dreams and sometimes, canon says, leading children away. We have seen oceans where Jellicent drags ships down, mountains where Frostlass decorates its lair with frozen bodies, alleys where Banette stalks the child who threw it away, and shadows where Gengar quietly steals the warmth from the air. And through all of it, the Pokédex has watched with us, recording each detail in the same calm voice. A skull, a balloon, a mask, a flame, a fungus, a keystone, a weapon, a hungry light. It has written down every strange behavior, every quiet tragedy, without raising its voice. And tonight, we have simply slowed down enough to read what it says. Now, it is time to close it. Imagine for a moment that you are that trainer again, younger, sitting cross-legged on your bed, with the Pokédex open in your lap. The room is dim. The glow from the screen paints faint shapes across the walls. You scroll one last time, past Cubone's entry, past Drifloon's, past Yamask's, past Litwick's, until the device tells you there is nothing new left to read tonight.
You feel the weight of the stories you've just seen. Sad, strange, sometimes frightening, and then you feel them begin to settle. Cubone is still in its cave, crying sometimes, but you are not there now.
Drifloon is still drifting at the edge of the fog, but you are inland, safe. Yamask is still riding the night wind with its mask, but it is far above you. The distortion world still exists on the reverse side of reality, but its jagged paths are quiet. Necrozma still hungers, out beyond the stars, but tonight it is not reaching for your window. You press the button. The Pokédex's screen goes dark, the little hum in your hands stops. All the entries you have read fold themselves back into silence, each one returning to its place in the data, waiting for some other night when you might open them again. The ghosts, the beasts, the kings, the children at the edges of forests and docks, all of them step back across the line from thought into memory. Outside your room, the towers are quiet. Lavender's radio signal fades into static. The burned tower looms in silhouette against a sky that is softer than it was when the flames rose. The ultimate weapon rests beneath the earth, dormant. The keystone sits half-buried, its spirits for now content to sleep. The ruins of Alph and Solacion are just stone and moss in the dark. The forest paths are empty. The docks are calm. The mountains are cold but still. Inside your room, there is only you, the faint sound of your own breathing, and the gentle weight of your body sinking into the mattress. You can feel your thoughts slowing. The images we've walked through together, skull, balloon, mask, flame, tower, keystone, weapon, are starting to blur at the edges, merging into a soft fog that no longer needs sharp detail. The Pokédex is closed. The story is, for tonight, told. There is nothing else you have to hold on to, nothing else you are required to remember in perfect clarity. If a stray fragment of lore drifts through, Cubone looking up at the moon, Drifloon bobbing just above the ground, Yamask trailing its mask along a stone wall, Litwick's little flame flickering at the end of a hallway, let it pass by the way clouds pass across a sky. You can acknowledge it, and then let it move on. There is no battle waiting, no puzzle you have to solve, no chapter you need to finish. The book is closed. The world can wait. Let your eyes grow heavy. If they are still open, feel how the lids want to lower. If they are already closed, notice the darkness behind them, the faint shifting colors that sometimes come and go as your mind winds down. Those colors are your own, not the glow of a Pokédex screen or the light of any ghostly flame. They are simply the way your thoughts begin to loosen. Your breathing is slow now. Inhale gently. Exhale gently. Each breath is like turning a page back into the book, returning one more scene to its entry, one more creature to its tower or forest or cave. The disturbing Pokédex, for tonight, is back on the shelf. You do not need to hold all its stories in your hands. You are safe, here, in your room. The caves of Kanto are far away. The towers of Johto are far away. The ruined battlefields of Kalos are far away. The distortion world is stitched to the underside of a reality you are not walking through tonight. The hungry lights and ancient weapons and wandering kings are all characters in a story that has, for now, ended. All that is left for you to do is rest. If another thought rises about a skull or a balloon or a mask or a flame, let it drift past and fade. If another image appears, Lavender's tower, Ecruteak's ruins, AZ beneath his weapon, let it soften, as though mist were rolling in around it. You can always come back to these stories another night. Open the Pokédex again, scroll through the entries, and listen. But you do not have to do that now. Now, you can simply sleep. Let the last of the words fall away. Let your body grow heavier. Let your mind find its own quiet tower, its own forest, its own safe place where no ghosts are waiting, where no weapons are humming beneath the soil, where no hungry lights are reaching for the sky. A place of stillness, where every disturbing entry you have ever read is folded neatly and stacked, and the book that holds them is gently closed. You do not need to read anything more tonight. You do not need to remember anything more tonight. You can let go. And as you do, as you allow your thoughts to slow and your breathing to settle, the world of Pokémon, the caves and towers and ruins and oceans, will continue on somewhere far away, full of its strange creatures and their strange stories, recorded faithfully in the Pokédex, waiting for another evening when you might want to visit. But for you, here, now, the journey is over. The screen is dark. The story has ended. You can sleep.